In this video, we're going to dive even deeper into how to play the King's Indian defense with black. Now, in the first video, I covered the foundations, including how to play against the most common variations that white can play against the King's Indian. So think of this as part 2, where we're going to cover some of the other variations that you might encounter so you can be as prepared as possible when you play the King's Indian. So let's jump in. So d4, knight f6, and we need to know what to do if white plays bishop to g5. This is deviating even earlier in the game than we covered in the first video. Now this is known as the Trompowsky attack. One of white's ideas here is actually to capture the knight and to play a quick e4, taking full control of the center. So my suggestion to fight against this is to play knight to e4, counter-attacking the bishop, forcing it to either move away or defend itself somehow. So there are 3 main moves that you'll see here. We'll cover the most common one first, which is just to retreat with bishop to f4. So now I would say that you should play in a different way than is normal in the King's Indian defense. So we're not actually going to go for the kingside fianchetto with g6, bishop to g7. Instead, we're going to look to play around this knight that we've got to the strong e4 square. So d5, and most likely white is going to try and fight against this knight. Now, white might play f3 straight away, in which case the knight does have to retreat, and you might get hit by e4, but don't worry about this. You can just reinforce it with e6, and if white pushes on, then the knight can go to d7, and you're going to play sort of like a French defense here. You're going to try and play c5, then after c5 is played, put the other knight on c6, and if you're familiar with the French defense, then you'll kind of know what to do. If you're not, then it might be worth watching a video on how to play the French with black. But this is absolutely fine for black. This bishop is a little bit misplaced on f4. But yeah, further ideas can include c5 and knight to c6. But if white instead challenges the knight in a different way, let's say with knight to d2, then we're going to see the main idea of reinforcing this knight with bishop to f5. So now if there's a capture, you can recapture, and you've still got a piece on the strong e4 square. And if white instead just looks to develop, let's say with knight to f3, then you can keep developing as well. Just e6, looking to bring out the dark squared bishop, let's say to d6. And one other idea that I wanted to share with you here is that if white captures on d6, then you can actually look to recapture with the pawn. Might look a little bit strange to recapture in a way which doubles your own pawns, but the idea is to control the e5 square, right? So now white doesn't have the ability to play knight to e5, and you might be able to play e5 yourself in the near future. I'd recommend castling first, but this pawn on d6 can actually be quite useful, supporting a future e5. So what else might white do all the way back here when the bishop is challenged like this? Well, it could also go to h4, which invites a lot of complications. I would go ahead and play g5, asking the bishop to move again. And here, if the bishop does move again, you can look to try and trap it with h5. Now, this is very aggressive, moving pawns in front of your own king like this, but the thing is that white isn't really developed enough to take advantage of it. This bishop, how many times has it moved already? It's moved 4. It's had to move 1, 2, 3 times. So 3 out of white's first 4 moves have involved moving that bishop. So we can actually take a bit of time to advance pawns and try and trap it. If he plays something like h3 in order to give the bishop an escape square, then you can capture, and this is quite a ruinous pawn structure around the white king side. And if white ever tries to go to e5, let's say that he just develops and you're allowed to play h4, well, if it's on e5, then you've got f6, and now the bishop is actually trapped. There's a very narrow path for white to avoid losing the piece here, involving f3, but you can see that probably what's going to happen is that the bishop is going to get traded for the knight, which is generally a good trade from black's point of view. After bishop to h4 and g5, white might look to counter straight away, in which case you can capture, he'll capture back, and now white does get this strong center, which you should fight against with c5, okay? Now if white captures, you can give this check and recover the pawn straight away. And if white looks to support the pawn on d4, so that if you captured, he would be able to recapture, well, then you can play this very cool move, bishop to h6, challenging that pawn, which actually turns out to be quite hard to defend. None of the minor pieces are in any position to defend the pawn, so white might defend it with the queen, for instance, but then you can play queen to b6, causing white more problems. So now this pawn on b2 is undefended, thanks to the fact that white's dark squared bishop was traded off, right? And black is going to be a bit better in a very complicated game. I mean, it's not really so safe to castle your king this way, but then again, you've also moved this pawn. So this is just chaos. But hey, if you play the King's Indian defense with black, then you should be looking to embrace the chaos. So this is a lot of fun. Both sides have got chances. Be very careful. It's going to get very tactical. The last thing that white could do after being faced with knight to e4, threatening the bishop, is to support the bishop with h4. Now, we should always ask in chess, what does our opponent want? Well, I think the fact that white is inviting us to capture the bishop probably means that we shouldn't do it, right? If you do capture it, then the h-file opens up, and this is what white wants. So I would just continue with the other plan that we saw before. So d5, bishop to f5, etc. Of course, with the bishop on g5, you won't be able to play e6 because that would lose the queen. But if we just play a few more moves here, just to show the type of thing that we might get, you can look to play c5. That's the alternative pawn break, right? Instead of e5 in the King's Indian. Yeah, this pawn is pinned, so you have to worry about this. So let's say c5, knight to d7. This is kind of the way that you're going to play. You can always capture this bishop at some moment if you need to, but I would not rush this. I would not rush this because that's, again, what white generally wants to see happen. So that gives you a good idea, hopefully, on how to play against the Trompowsky attack. Remember, the key points: knight to e4, attacking the bishop. In the main line where white retreats, you're going to play with d5, bishop to f5, e6, bishop to d6, and look to castle kingside. In some of those other lines, you have to rely on your wits a bit more, right? If he plays bishop to h4 and you get this crazy line like this, then, you know, you've got to use your calculation. You've got to use your abilities that you've hopefully honed in other areas of your training. Now, if you're enjoying this video so far, do go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I do all kinds of content on chess, including reviewing master games, instructional videos on the opening like this one, also tips on how to improve. So, by subscribing, you won't miss out on any of the future videos that I'm preparing for you. Okay, on to the next variation. This time, the new move, which we haven't seen yet, comes on move 5, with the move f4. Now, this is the 4 pawns attack. And one thing that we're taught in chess is that we should look to fight for the center. And, well, white has definitely done that. White has actually taken full control of the center with a lot of extra space. But white has spent 4 out of their first 5 moves moving pawns, which means that black is going to be a bit better developed in terms of piece play. And we're going to look to take advantage of this. Now, the move that I'm going to recommend here is c5. This is because the normal King's Indian defense pawn advance with e5 isn't really possible, since the pawn on f4 and d4 both work against that pawn advance. So c5 is the alternative. And if white captures here, then we've got an important move here. It's not to recapture. If you recapture, then white will get to trade queens. And even though the queens are traded, it's not ideal to have the king lose castling rights like this with so many pieces still left on the board. Instead, if white were to make this capture, then I'd recommend queen to a5. Okay, so this has a couple of effects. The first effect is it looks to regain the pawn, and the second effect is that it pins this knight. So if white were to try and defend the pawn, well, then you can capture on e4. The knight can't take back because of the pin. And the same thing if white takes on d6. Once again, you can take on e4, the knight is pinned. If white took again, well, this is going to be disastrous for white, because now you can capture here and take here. You're going to pick up the rook probably. So yeah, this is already winning for black. In fact, white can resign here, which is why you won't see this move d takes c5 very often, at least not by strong players. If white breaks the pin, then you can just regain the pawn with a position which I think is slightly favourable to black. This queen is well placed. It's pointing towards white's kingside. It's going to prevent white from castling kingside, at least not immediately. White's going to have to need to do some work in order to chase this queen away from the diagonal before being able to castle kingside. So this is absolutely fine for black. So what else might you see after c5? Well, you might see e5, looking to challenge the knight, trying to take even more space, but now white is definitely overextended. You can play knight f to d7, and yeah, this pawn center is going to collapse pretty quickly. What could white do? Let's say knight to f3, looking to finally develop. Well, now you can take on d4, and however white takes back, black is winning a pawn. There's just not enough defenders, and having won a pawn, black is better. Similar story if you take with the queen. Now you can actually play knight to c6, attacking the queen and also adding an extra attacker onto e5. So once the queen moves away, once again e5 is under defended. So the move that you'll see most often after c5 is d5, looking to close the center. Okay, so now we're going to look to open the center because white has spent so many moves playing pawns that none of the kingside pieces are developed, and the king is also in the center. So we can play e6, looking to open up the center a little bit. Let's say that white finally develops. Okay, well, we can open up here, and let's say white takes back with the d pawn. Well, then we can castle and look to put pressure onto e4. After, let's say, bishop to d3, rook to e8. If white castles, well, then we can look to try and win this pawn tactically with the move c4. If white takes, then we win the e4 pawn, and we've traded one of the pawns on the c file for the pawn on the e file for white. Generally, a good rule in chess is that a center pawn is worth more than a pawn on the flanks. If white looks to retreat, well, then we can try again with the same sort of idea, right? Now, if the knight takes once more, we can take on e4, and we've traded a flank pawn for a center pawn. White could try and stop this advance, but now we can again look to try and bring our forces around here to target this weak pawn on e4. So this is a key idea in the four pawns attack, or against the four pawns attack, I should say. Targeting this pawn on e4. If all the way back here, white instead plays the bishop to e2, okay, so looking to block the e file. This is one other way that white can look to play, is trying to advance here and actually sacrifice a pawn in the process. So now this is a lot of space, but white can't hold on to both of those pawns. This pawn is attacked 3 times and defended just once. So white will often look to give up the pawn in the best way that he can and cause some damage around the black king. And yeah, so now black is a pawn up, but white has this strong pawn on d6. I think we can look to fight against this. Let's say that white castles by moving the bishop into c6 and moving the knight into d7. That's the way that I recommend playing, because one idea from white that you want to prevent or just be aware of is bringing their knight into e4. Okay, so the bishop on c6 stops knight to e4. Now, what can we say about a position like this one? Well, it's very dynamic, it's very imbalanced. White is down a pawn, but white has extra space, thanks to the pawn on d6. Now, if as black you can never win this pawn, then you're going to be clearly better. So this is one thing that you can look to aim for in the middle game to come. But in the meantime, it's going to be complex, which is just exactly the sort of thing that you should be embracing if you're going to play the King's Indian defense with black. Now, if you're looking to supercharge your results in the King's Indian defense, then you can have me on your side as your chess mentor. I offer my services to those who are looking to improve their results in the game at the below 2000 ELO level. So if you'd like to explore working with me, then click the link in the description below. It's the pinned comment or at the top of the description. I can tell you all about the Road to 2000 Chess Improvement Program, and we can see if working together will be a good fit. Okay, let's check out another way that White has of playing against the King's Indian defense. So we'll run through the moves that we've seen already, and we'll pause when we get to the move that we haven't seen yet. It's this move, bishop to e3 on move 7 from White. Now the key thing about this is that White has put their bishop on e3 without preventing the move knight to g4. So since White hasn't prevented it, we're going to play it. Now the first point is that if White allows us to take this bishop, then we're going to do it. If White castled, for example, then you snap off that bishop without a moment's hesitation. After White takes back, well then White's got a weak pawn on e3, and Black's got the bishop pair. So Black is better in this position. Which is why strong players with White are not going to allow you to take their bishop like this. Instead, they're probably going to look to counterattack with bishop to g5. Now that attacks the queen. So I would recommend trying to regain the initiative with the move f6. So now the bishop's got to move again. Now there's two squares that the bishop is going to retreat to, and let's look at both of them. The first one is with bishop to h4. Now what I'd suggest you do here is just play a waiting move. We need to develop the queen side after all, and we're waiting to see where White is going to put their king. So if White castles now, well now we can play g5. The key behind waiting to see where White puts their king is that if we had played g5 straight away, well then the bishop does have to retreat, but White still might play h4 and look to open up the position around the black king, which has been weakened significantly by playing the pawn up to g5. Okay, we want to wait until White has put their own king on g1 by castling kingside before pushing too many pawns in front of our own king like this. So knight to c6, and then if White castles, well now we play g5, and the difference is that we can play in more of a mainline King's Indian defense setup now, being aggressive with pawns on the king's side without worrying too much about White being able to counterattack. So from here, I would suggest putting the knight back on h6 to support a future f5, f4, standard King's Indian defense ideas. This knight on h6 might look a little strange, but you have to be a little bit careful with the knight on g4. There can be a tactic, like there can be some kind of discovered attack with a knight takes g5, or maybe a knight takes e5, revealing an attack on the knight with the bishop and the queen like this. So it's just a bit safer on h6, and it's quickly going to get back into the game after f5 is played. Maybe if White captures, you can take back with the knight, or maybe it can come around via f7 to get back into the game. So the other move that White could play, back when we played f6, is to retreat the bishop all the way back to c1. Now it might look strange putting the bishop back on its starting square like this, but the point is that White has provoked us as Black into playing f6. So White is happy enough to play this move. Again, I'd consider playing knight to c6 at this point, just developing. And there's a number of different moves that White could play here. He could play d5, and if he does play d5, then the knight can actually go into d4, and it gets quite tactical. And this is the type of position where it really helps to have studied the thematic middle game ideas. Not just the opening moves, but the thematic middle game ideas, because it might seem as though at first glance you're losing a pawn here. Let's take a look at how. Well, what if White were to take here? Can White win the pawn, for example, with knight to b5? Looks like it, right? I mean, that pawn seems pretty hard to defend. It's attacked twice and defended. Well, it's not defended at all. And how can you defend it? You could play f5, which is actually the move that I recommend. And, well, White can take. But the amazing thing here is that actually Black can take on e4, regaining the pawn. But, I hear you say, what about this knight on g4? Well, if White takes it, we've got a thematic tactic here which you should know about if you're going to play in the way that I'm recommending against the Gligoric system. It's queen to h4. So the thing is that white has been slow to castle their king, so this move, queen to h4, comes with two threats. One is to take on f2, which would be checkmate, and the other is that the queen on h4 adds another attacker to the bishop. So now the bishop is attacked twice, and, well, white really has to stop the checkmate threat, obviously. So now we can regain the bishop, and we've got a threat against the queen, and yeah, black has regained the material with a much better position. So this is a tactical idea well worth keeping in mind. There's plenty of other moves that we could see from white back here. After knight to c6, white could also castle, in which case I think it's more clear that we can play f5 with similar ideas. Just one thing to be aware of, what if white comes back into g5 with the bishop? Quite annoying, right? So now the queen is attacked again, and the pawn can't move to f6 anymore because we've already advanced it to f5. Well, then I would recommend putting it on d7. Now the idea of this is just to fight against the possibility of the annoying knight to b5. If you move the queen somewhere else, like if you move it to e8, then the knight to b5 is very irritating because now this pawn is attacked with a threat of a fork. So yeah, queen to d7 is a better place to put the queen. So those are some ideas against the Gligoric system. And by the way, I'll just mention as well that we could see similar ideas if white were to castle first. So after e5, if white continues with the main line and you play knight to c6, we might see bishop to e3 the next move. This is known as the Gala variation, but you can play with very similar ideas here. Starting with knight to g4, I won't run through an entire analysis of how the Gala variation is different from the Gligoric, but just know that it's pretty similar. The difference is that white has castled already, but still we're attacking the stark squared bishop. If it moves to g5 or to c1, you can play with the ideas that I've already given earlier in this video. Right, let's see another way that white can play. This time it's with bishop to e2 and bishop to g5, with the kingside knight still on starting square. This is known as the Averbakh variation, and the first point that you need to realize if you're playing against this with black is that if you play in the same way with the e5 pawn advance, then you're quickly going to run into big problems after white trades on e5 and then trades queens, because the follow-up from white is very strong. It's the move knight to d5. And now black is losing material in all lines because there's two threats here and black can't deal with both of them. One threat is to capture on c7. The other threat is to capture on f6. This bishop on g5 means that this knight is already pinned when the white knight shows up on d5. So white is winning here. So we want to avoid all of this, which is why before you play e5, you should instead play the move knight to a6. We saw that the c7 pawn can be a problem, so the move knight to a6 defends that pawn against a possible future knight to d5, allowing us to play e5 soon. So what might we see from white here? We might see the move knight to f3, which would be natural development, in which case I think you can just push the dark squared bishop away. It's a bit annoying there on g5, so if it moves back to e3, then we can hit it again with this move knight to g4. Thematic idea, by the way, to remember. If there's a white bishop on e3 and you can attack it with knight to g4, it's usually a good idea to do so. Let's say the bishop retreats again. Well, now you can play e5. Let's say white castles, and we've got a normal-ish King's Indian position, which you can play with similar ideas that we've already studied. But more likely, I think, is that you'll see the move queen to d2, which heralds a more aggressive approach from white. So what you can do here is you can now play e5, and this will show the point of having the knight on a6, because if white captures now and trades queens, well then the move knight to d5 doesn't have nearly as great of an impact, because the pawn on c7 is already defended, so we can play rook to d6, guarding this knight, and play c6 next, kicking the knight away from its strong post. The rook looks a bit awkward on d6, but actually, concretely, everything is defended. So probably white isn't going to want to go for this. White is not wanting to play with queens traded off the board most of the time. So what you'll probably see after e5 is white closing the center with d5. Now this knight's got the ability to jump into c5 in the future. But first, c6. So given that white is probably going to either leave their king in the center or castle queenside, we just want to open up the center a little bit here. This move c6 is a move that you can look for when white looks as though they're not going to castle kingside. In those other lines, like in the main line where white does castle kingside, then you don't want to open up the queenside like this. And in fact, you should do just the opposite. You should try to keep the queenside as closed as possible. But here, white is playing in a different way, which necessitates a different approach. So c6, let's say that white plays f3 here, looking to start pushing pawns on the kingside. Well, then we can capture on d5. And if white takes back with this pawn, well, if white does now castle queenside, we can kind of see the point that we've now got an open c-file to attack along. Now, this is not the only way that white has of playing, but we can also see a thematic mistake here from white. Like, what if white tries to play g4 straight away? Well, now we can actually play the move h6, surprisingly, because if white takes the bait, right, it looks like a free pawn, but if white takes it, we've got this discovered attack, which attacks the queen, so it's a forcing move which needs to be replied to. And if white takes on e4, we've got the move queen to h4 check, a very important tactic, well worth bearing in mind. This is going to regain the piece after, let's say, king to f1. Well, now we can take on h6. We've got the unopposed dark squared bishop in a position where white has got a lot of dark squared weaknesses. All right, so if white tries to push pawns too aggressively, too early, watch out for that thematic tactic. Another thematic tactic to watch out for is if, after c6, what if white plays knight to f3 now and tries to recapture on d5? Now it looks as though, again, we're facing quite a lot of pressure here. The bishop and the knight are both attacking this knight on f6. But once again, pays to know the thematic middle game tactics, because surprisingly you can actually capture on e4. Well, that does leave the queen under attack, but the thing is that we can also win white's queen because of the positioning of it on d2. If the bishop retreats, then we can get this knight out of trouble with check, and we're still an extra pawn up. And if white instead takes here, well, then we can take the bishop. And again, black is a pawn up. So these are ideas well worth keeping in mind, right? Like, you can definitely imagine that white can make mistakes like this, particularly if they're new to playing the opening, or particularly if they're not paying enough attention. So just having these tactics up your sleeve can help you win a lot of games, even at pretty high levels. Like, I've seen 1900 rated opponents, 2000 rated opponents fall for tactics like this. And it's always sweet when you have studied something and you can actually play the tactic in a real game. Now, you might be wondering to yourself how you can remember all of this. There's a lot to take in, I know. And in this video, I share my exact system, how you can add thematic middle game ideas or key strategic ideas into a free-to-use chess software so that you can train them with spaced repetition so that you can recall them in the middle of your own games. Go ahead and check it out.